Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 8, Episode 18, presented by Salonis. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our special guest on this episode is Chris Riccobono, founder at UNTUCKit, men's and now women's apparel specialty store. I'm a big fan of the brand. They have some stores here in Canada. I guess I would say this is a pretty good embodiment of the special, not big category that you speak of quite often.
Yeah, for sure. I think also UNTUCKit is one of the kind of OGs of the new wave of digitally native vertical brands and was one of the first, as folks will hear, we'll talk about, one of the first companies to really see that physical stores were likely to be essential to the successful growth of the brand. So I think there's a lot of good, a little bit of history of the recent evolution, but also some specific strategy points that Chris does a good job articulating.
You know, we speaking of our guests, our last episode we featured an interview we did in 2022 with Nancy King from Target. Now, it turned out we put this in the notes. We added at the last minute formally because she's moved on from Target to be a chief tech officer at another organization. So congratulations to Nancy. We're also getting excited for Shop Talk Europe coming up in Barcelona. Early June. We'll be recording a few episodes in the Bamboozer remote podcast studio. Thanks to Bamboozer for their support. We'll be talking about that a little bit more. And you've got a session on the stage. I think it is on the Wednesday, right?
Right. I'm going to be speaking with my panelists to how to optimize direct-to-consumer versus wholesale. That's been a hot topic, I think, for a year or so now, and doing the prep calls for that. So I'll share a little bit more about that in the weeks ahead. But yeah, that'll be Wednesday at 2 p.m. And then on the Monday, we'll be on the show floor with a live on-stage episode of the podcast. I believe we're scheduled to do that at 5:30 p.m. So if you will be at Shop Talk, come see Michael and me live.
All right, so we've got some news coming up that makes me think maybe we have the gift of prophecy.
Yeah, last week, people might remember, we talked about Peloton's very disappointing earnings, layoffs, CEO leaving, and so forth. And I had predicted last year that Peloton might be an acquisition candidate. And then I said that I still thought they were, though the timing might not be great. Well, that's the part I didn't get exactly right. But Peloton appear to be in talks with PE firms about being acquired. So more to come on that. Also part of my predictions, which I think we touched on also a few weeks ago, rumors have it, I think on fairly good authority, that the Saks-Neiman Marcus merger looks to be very close. So obviously there's always things that could go awry at the last minute, but perhaps by the time, I don't think the Peloton deal is going to happen for a little bit because they're just getting started on that. But perhaps by the time this airs or people listen to it, Saks and Neiman Marcus might be together in what I think is ultimately something that is inevitable, whether it will actually happen in the immediate future or not.
And you would be, so to speak, a fan of that deal. Like that deal makes some sense to you intuitively. We talk about other deals that kind of make our heads turn and scratch our heads a little bit. This one makes sense to you, yeah?
Well, yeah, it does, given where things are. I think if you're in an industry that's contracting and you don't really have a good path to growth, this is really about rationalization and taking capacity out of the market. So it's unfortunate. I mean, if either of those companies had actually figured out how to get on a growth trajectory, I would say this wouldn't make sense that one of them should emerge victorious. But at this point, I think they really don't have any solid options. So yeah, I mean, I don't love it sort of big picture but I'd given my history at Neiman Marcus, but I do think, I've been saying for about 3 years that it's inevitable that this will happen.
Let's talk about results. And we do like, both of us, we were talking off mic about this, the NRF CNBC U.S. monthly report gives us, with their perspective, gives us a nice take on U.S. sales. What did you observe peak? What did you peak, as the kids would say, about monthly sales report?
Yeah, we haven't touched on this for a few months, so I thought we would bring this back. I think what we see overall is that, in total, sales growth continues to decelerate in the U.S., still positive. It's a little bit hard to read this specifically because of the Easter shift. So I think we'll need a little bit greater time frame to
It's early this year.
Yeah. So, and I think also as we start to get more earnings, and we'll talk about a few company earnings in a second, we'll get a more granular sense of who the winners and losers are. But if you look at the category level, online and other non-store sales were up very strongly, over 14% year over year. Separately, there's an Adobe study, which maybe conflicts a little bit with this because they have lower numbers for online sales growth. But they do point out, the Adobe folks point out that part of the reason why growth is decelerating on online in particular is because of a lot of the trading down phenomenon. So average unit retail driving that, not necessarily transactions.
And they're taking that number from their platforms, but it's interesting because we're going to talk about Shopify later. There's other competing platforms, so maybe they're not getting the complete picture, right? Yeah,
that's always an issue. What is the data source? Again, to your point about why we like the NRF CNBC data is it's a broader perspective, actually, from transactions rather than piecing together reports as the U.S. Census Bureau does. So, but just turning quickly to other categories, continued strength in health and personal care, though also less than we have seen. That was kind of running more in the 8, 9, 10% range, now closer to 5. Starting to see some rebound in the home improvement categories. Building and garden supply stores were up just over 4%. Clothing and accessory stores, kind of weak at 2%. That's really a continuing trend. The general merchandise stores, so this would include the Walmarts and the Targets, as well as the department stores, more or less flat. And that is also a deceleration. Again, we don't know exactly how the Easter shift affected that. I suspect, again, when we hear the earnings reports, we'll get a little color commentary on that. And then I guess I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought a couple other interesting ones. Big ticket, as we've been talking about probably for close to 2 years now. So electronics, appliances, furniture, et cetera, continue to be down. And the one that was most...
What did you think of that Apple ad? It's funny. I haven't seen controversy over an ad in a long time. That squishy thing that created the new iPad Pro.
I was actually thinking of including that in the stories because it's an example of being remarkable, but not in a good way, right? So,
right.
So you got to be careful not to poke people in the eye too much. They remember it and they might tell a lot of people, but not super helpful.
Not a good way.
The one, and I'm going to guess that this is a category that's particularly affected by Easter, is that grocery stores were down about 4.5%. And I think this is the first time I can remember. I didn't go back to check, but we've typically seen grocery shops up, some of that driven by inflation. So again, we'll have to kind of see how the earnings parse out.
I got a quick comment on that. That's something we're seeing North American wide. And one of the theories is that people are shopping more and more in alternative places for their food because of the cost of the food. So they're going to the dollar store and buying smaller packages. And so, it's difficult to see in the data. As you say, the Easter numbers may get a bit confusing. But I do think there's some of that channel shifting that isn't reported. The grocers report one way, but the dollar stores may not report it as food. And then, you've got the data.
No, that's a great point because also presumably Walmart, Target, Meijer, some of the big general merchandise stores, which have very significant. I mean, Walmart is the biggest grocer in the U.S. They would be in the general merchandise numbers. So if to the extent you had format shift, that definitely could explain. That's an excellent point. I hadn't really considered that until you mentioned it.
All right, let's do a quick rundown of earnings. We're starting to get into earnings season. Very mixed picture. Let's start with Warby Parker.
Yeah, so it's going to be fast and furious here. We are just getting to the end of those retailers, the relatively few number of retailers that end their quarter at the end of March, and then we'll be kicking into most of the retailers that end their quarter in April in a couple of weeks. But Warby Parker, which may be an example, as much as we talk about wobbly unicorns here, Warby Parker may be one of those that is finding its footing, even though they've had kind of negative performance, at least from a stock perspective, for the past couple of years. They reported really I think that you would have to say the best quarter in their history. Sales were up a strong 16%. Their customer metrics, which I'm not going to go through in detail, were all quite positive. They improved their margins, operating margins, and they're just about break even on a GAAP basis and at about I think 10% operating margin and this adjusted EBITDA they do, which mostly takes out a lot of the stock compensation. So I think we've talked about there's always an argument as to how to think about that. But in any case, very strong improvement. They're up to 245 stores. They say they're on track to open 40 this year, on their way to 900. And it appeared, I'd been a little bit, critical, but a little bit skeptical about how some of their newer stores are performing. But I would say this report suggests that, not that it's perfect, but they really credited with the strength in their physical stores for a contribution. So that is some good news amidst some of the things we see with the so-called disruptor brands.
Let's speaking of physical stores, let's talk about Simon Property.
Yeah, another good quarter for Simon Property. So if people don't know, Simon is one of the biggest mall operators in the world. They, I think you can really, this whole debate about what's happening with malls and, the idea that malls are dead or dying, really, as I think hopefully by now most people know, the weaker malls are in big trouble and are either getting bulldozed or repurposed. But if you look at the so-called A malls, where Simon Property and a few others have their strength, they're doing quite well.
Yeah, it's a flight to quality for sure.
Absolutely. And I was asked the other day about, what explains this. And I think because of this sort of narrative about malls being weak. But if you look at the top malls, they typically have a really great mix of typically higher end specialty stores, Lululemon, Apple, a lot of the up and coming brands like Warby Parker, as well as a strong tenant mix. So whether that's a Neiman's or Saks or Nordstrom or whatever, and then, typically better food offerings and theater. And so they've got a powerful mix. So you do see the top 100, 150 malls doing well. That's where Simon is concentrated. So they reported occupancy at 95.5%. That's up a full point, more than a full point since last year. Their rent per square foot is also up about 3%, and their sales per square foot are $745. So, for example, that would compare to, Macy's these days. It would be well under 200. So you really see that kind of high-end specialty store mix. The other thing that happened, they've been selling off their stake in Authentic Brands Group. And they actually sold all of it off this past quarter for a large gain. So that was a good investment for them. They are still partners with ABG, Jamie Salter, who's I don't know if he's the founder, but he's the CEO. They're still partners in this so-called Spark Group, which has several other investments, including the joint venture, essentially, ownership of JCPenney. And they've got a ton of cash on the balance sheet. So it'll be interesting to see whether we might see some acquisition activity there, but really strong performance. And again, kind of this, bifurcation of, the best getting better and the worst sinking.
Third time, not the charm for Rue 21. They've their third bankruptcy filing and maybe the last one, right?
Well, one should always rue the day that you file for bankruptcy.
Or the 21 days. There you go.
Yeah, this is a brand that has been struggling for quite some time. As you mentioned, this is their third bankruptcy filing. They appear to be in the process of liquidating. They've announced they're going to close all 540 stores. So that's a pretty significant, they're not huge stores, but that's a pretty significant number of stores to close. And I think, it's another indication of what I talk about as the collapse of the unremarkable middle. This is a brand that really had a hard time differentiating itself, either on having a strong personality and brand image, having anything really differentiated, whether that's on kind of the value side or on the more higher end fashion side. So, they're hardly the only undifferentiated apparel player we've seen close or pull back or continue to suffer. So I think fundamentally, even though we have seen, not only department stores, which are obviously strong in apparel, close, but we've also seen quite a few specialty stores close. And I think we're going to continue to need to see more capacity come out of the market because there's just too much space, not to make it all about space, because obviously there's a strong e-commerce business as well, but there's just too much supply essentially chasing pretty tepid demand, whether that's because of what we talked about earlier, just, more casualization, lower price points, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, I think Shein has something to do with it as well. I mean, Route 21 would definitely be closer to the top of the list than farther that would be impacted from all that volume coming over from the fast fashion and a direct model, right?
Yep. Yeah, I would think so.
Let's talk about Target. So in my day, Target came to Canada and they bought a mass merchant called Zellers and had an ill-fated launch. But they're back with Hudson's Bay. They called them back up and they're actually taking some product and putting it in distribution in Hudson's Bay here in Canada.
Yeah, this is, I was sort of on the fence about this story because it was hyped quite a bit by Target. So the specific story is they already announced that they were doing a small assortment of this brand Cat and Jack, which I believe is about a $3 billion brand in the U.S., a kids brand, and that they were expanding the number of SKUs with Hudson Bay into swimwear and some other things, but also that they were exploring other partnership opportunities outside of the U.S., so the U.S., South America, perhaps Asia. On the one hand, you could say, wow, this is a really smart strategy to leverage Target's strengths in private brand, because not only do they have Cat and Jack, but they have quite a few others that have really been successful developing multiple mega private brands, great upside.
And it's incremental here in Canada. They don't have stores here, so
right. It's incremental. So it doesn't seem like it's going to cannibalize, so to speak, their U.S. business. So I think it's interesting. I think it remains to be seen how significant it could become. But it is kind of hard to see that it's going to be massive in the scheme of things for a company as big as Target. And the more cynical, and I heard a few other people make comments about this, the more cynical side of me says, well, Target's been struggling to show growth the last several quarters. Maybe this is like, hey, look over here, because they're about to announce perhaps another a not so exciting quarter in a couple of weeks whenever they report. So I think it's interesting. My sense is, though, it's probably not terribly significant over the long term, but we'll see. I mean, at this point, just what they're doing with Hudson Bay is really de minimis. But if they were able to do some broader partnerships with other brands in Canada or get into several other big markets, that would start to be more interesting.
Let's leave it there before we get to our interview with Chris Riccobono from UNTUCKit. Let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and Edeka, head to celonis.com/remarkable retail. Chris, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, happy Monday. Now, where are we finding you today? I think your offices are in New York City, yeah?
The offices are in Soho. I am currently in New Jersey.
Now, Soho, that was the first store. Was that the first store? Do I have that history right?
Yeah, September 2015 on Prince Street. That was the first pop-up we ever had, which it did pretty well. So we then opened up 90 stores in the following 2.5 years.
Fantastic. Well, we want to dive into all that, but let's start with a little bit about you. Who are you, and how did you get to be you, and what do you do for a living?
So I am Chris Riccobono, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but of course you can't just, as I tell young people, you can't just be an entrepreneur. You need to have an idea. So I took a few sales jobs with GE Healthcare and allowed me to do things on the side, and I tried a bunch of terrible ideas that never went anywhere. And then I tried an idea that probably sounded the worst out of all of them, to make a shorter shirt. People laughed at that when we went to fundraise based on that concept. But we gathered a little bit of money together, and in 2011 we launched. And in 2013 we marketed for the first time, and we basically sold out of shirts. When people heard shirts designed to be worn untucked, back then, there were none that were at the right length. They were all, down to mid-thigh, and it got people really excited. And from there, we just kept ramping up marketing, kind of pretty much everywhere, as you probably saw. Airline magazines, radio, didn't matter what it was, it returned. Now I am still the founder of UNTUCKit. I also own a new business, which we could talk about, called Greatness Wins with Derek Jeter. That's an athletic apparel, but most of my time is with UNTUCKit.
I'm kind of curious. What do you think was it that created that spark of entrepreneurship? Like, did you, when you were growing up as a little kid, did you have a lemonade stand kind of thing, or what was it that sparked that interest in being A, in business, and B, your own person and your own entrepreneur?
I think two things for me. It wasn't really like that, like the classic case of the young kid always trying to make money in a way. Mine was post-college, or as I was nearing the end of college, I just couldn't come to terms with, having to go to work in a suit every day and shave and be nice to people who weren't nice to me.
You're talking to the right people here. Michael and I still struggle with that every day here, 40 years later.
But it bothered me, and I was just thinking, man, I really want to work for myself. And the other thing, I was always someone who I wanted to control my schedule. I wanted to kind of live life and not be on a train for 2 hours. I grew up in northern Jersey, where every single person was a finance guy, got up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m., came home at 8 o'clock at night. And I did it for one summer, and I was just so depressed. So I was just thinking, how can I do this without having to do that? And the other one is, I've always been more motivated on upside rather than, in other words, if you gave me an offer that was very generous and said, this is going to be the amount of money you make for the rest of your life, or gave me an offer that was way lower than that, but said you could make this money if you achieve something, that's what gets me up in the morning, is the ability to kind of have a shot to hit a home run. So those two things had me doing everything in my power to get out of corporate America.
So obviously you seem to have found a pretty good path with UNTUCKit. You started to touch on this, but can you tell us a little bit more about the start of the business? You mentioned that many people had the reaction that it was kind of the dumbest idea that they had heard in a while. And I will say, when I first heard about UNTUCKit, I was kind of like, well, it's really interesting. It seems to be based on a pretty good customer insight, but how do you actually build it into a sizable brand? Because it seems like it would be pretty easy for somebody else to knock it off. So talk a little bit about how the business really got started, what makes it remarkable, and how you've been able to create such a strong, powerful brand in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, and the answer is, I had no idea at the time, because today you look around and you see a new business started every day, and everyone kind of knows the blueprint of an e-commerce company. Back then, we were the second or third. We were there with the Bonobo right after Bonobos, and I think Warby Parker might have been there, maybe Casper. You went on Facebook and it was great. There was no cost to acquire a customer was nothing. But we also didn't know the blueprint, because no one did. Okay, how much money do you spend on paid social? Should you spend money on paid social? How do you ramp up your social, your organic social account? Where do you spend your money? Like, no one knew that. The world of e-com, direct to consumer, was brand new. So what we did was it's kind of funny actually, we made horrible shirts for the first 2 years, because I walked around 37th Street and walked into these places that looked like they made shirts. I brought this one shirt that I liked, which was an out-of-spec J. Crew shirt. But I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know you had to pre-wash shirts, that you needed quality control, that you needed technical specs and all these different things. But luckily, we had no money, so we weren't really marketing, and it was more of a hobby, to be honest with you, at the time. But the responses were just incredible. We were getting these paragraph emails from anyone who would find out about us, and that doesn't typically happen for men in clothing. Men don't really care typically, right? They go to J. Crew back. I went to J. Crew back in the day, because you have to go get some nice clothing. These guys were getting passionate about the brand, that they wish they had done it. They've been looking for it. This is amazing. So it was a little different. And even when we opened our first store in Soho, and I don't say this to be funny or to exaggerate, I mean, I would get hugged 5 times a day in that store from guys who just were looking for this solution. And they had spent so much money trying to get a shirt shortened, which doesn't really work because it's 50-50 whether it's going to fit. And they were just ecstatic. So you could see right away this love of the brand that remains to this day. It kind of took off. I remember the story where we knew something was there was because we had no money. I think we had like $25,000, and we had dragged on for about 3 years. We were both working. I brought on my partner from Columbia Business School. We were both working full time, and we said, we got to do something here, because people love the brand, but we're not growing as fast as we should be. So we called Boomer and Carton, which is a morning show, sports radio, and we said, we want to advertise. And they're like, you need $100,000 and you need a few months, because it takes time for people to buy when you're marketing. and we said we have 3 weeks and 20 grand. And the first ad ran. And there were like 2,000 people on the site, like within 30 seconds. And you're driving in a car, most likely, hearing sports radio. And we said, okay, let's try an airline magazine. We don't have enough money to be in the GQ. Let's try an airline magazine, 15K. And we made 45K. And then we just went to all 3 airline magazines. And we went to radio. We went to Howard Stern. We went to New York Times, New York Post. And it just kind of exploded. And then obviously the store growth took a life of its own. So it was, some of it was right time. It's much harder to do this today because of all the cost to acquire a customer and all the competition. Obviously in 2019, every single company that's out there devoted their entire campaign to untucked shirts, leading it in their windows, Vineyard Vines, setting up a shop inside for shirts meant to be worn untucked. But to be honest with you, it fueled our business because people would kind of get annoyed, our customers, saying, these guys are copying you, and now they call anyone in an untucked shirt an UNTUCKit. That's what you hear. It's kind of like a tissue and Kleenex. The amount of people who tell me someone was wearing an UNTUCKit on TV and it's not an UNTUCKit. But that's a great thing for the brand and for the long-term, nature of the brand.
Well, it's a great jumping off point for the next kind of questions is the evolution of the brand. I mean, from the spark of a brilliant idea, you've expanded both physically and online, and I think your assortment's expanded as well. So could you touch on a couple of those things? One, your expansion of the business. I'm in Toronto. You've got stores here in Canada, and also the way you think about your brand and assortment since you're launching back in 2011.
Pre-COVID, we expanded into Canada and then even England. We had 2 stores there, but unfortunately, they all opened, a few months before COVID. As far as and we're still in Canada and have a very solid e-commerce business up in Canada. We're actually going to be expanding in some other countries, which we're not announcing yet, but it's pretty exciting. As far as
nobody listens to the podcast, so
so feel free.
Yeah, it's just a secret.
So as far as the other products, these were all determined by customers reaching out to us. The first thing was always a polo shirt and a T-shirt, which they said were just too long, which I kind of agreed with. Or it was more lack of consistency. You buy one T-shirt, it was down to your knees. You buy another one, it was short. So we wanted to really, ramp up quality control on all products and just make them fall at what is the right untucked length. Now, we obviously then went into pants, and you'd say, well, what do pants have to do with UNTUCKit? And the answer is nothing. But I was very adamant about, and I must have had to answer this question to maybe a potential investor or an investor. You guys are marketing shirts designed to be worn untucked, and you're trying to grow the rest of the business. And I thought personally that Bonobos' biggest mistake ever was getting away from their pants message, because that's what really made them so well known. And if you talk to a young guy a few years ago and ask him about Bonobos, they didn't even know they were known for their pants. So they blended into all the other stores out there. For us, I wanted to get the hook every time with a shirt designed to be worn untucked. Once you come in, you'll see that we have all these other great products. And what happened was our quality is very high end. Our quality control is crazy, because if our shirt's a quarter too long or a quarter too short, you can't. It blends in. If it's too long and it's too short, you can't wear it. So we had to we set our own rules up that had never been seen in fashion on, testing every yard of fabric, double, triple washing the fabric, rejecting anything out of tolerance, drove the factories crazy. But that same thing goes across all of our products: consistency of fit, quality. And our customers love that. So when they get on the site and they see we have pants, they buy pants. Like, pants is our fastest growing category. And, even our women's brand does very well. We're going to begin marketing that more. And we are it's finally time, after 12 years or 14 years, however long this has been, to ramp up marketing. So we're doing a commercial that's going to spend some more time on our other products for the first time, because I think now it's safe to say that we're known for our shirts and I don't have to worry about not being known for them. So that's kind of how we expanded. And now we do a lot of business in non-button-down shirt products. And like, our sweaters fit perfectly with our untucked shirt. Our sports jackets fit perfectly with our sweater and our untucked shirt. So it's all meant to kind of go together. Yeah,
right on. Can we spend a minute on how you see physical stores and digital together? I mean, you're one of the original, as you said, disruptor brands, as they're kind of known, and you've grown and thrived. And talk about how you think about the stores and their role. Are they as much marketing as sales, and just how you think about that intersection of this harmonized retail that we might call it.
Well, the crazy thing is, it's constant. My mind is and opinion is constantly changing because of COVID. I mean, it's been such a roller coaster ride of retail, of stores, only stores, and e-com. Stores are going away, then back to no stores because COVID is this and that. So my view is, number one, I knew I needed stores because 70% of our customers said they would not buy for us unless they touched and felt the product. So right then, even though all these people in the press would be predicting or giving their opinion, I knew the answer because I had all these men saying, I'm not buying your product unless you have a store. And then when I opened our first store and everyone came in, most of the guys were like, I've wanted to buy you, but I've not done it unless I could come into a store. So that's that. Then you have, obviously at the time in pre-19, it was all about e-commerce growth. So you had your stores, but you're focused on e-com growth because that's what the investors wanted to see. And that was the, supposedly the best way to acquire a customer. Well, now here we are, and the cost to acquire a customer online is so expensive because all of these little brands, and I say little brands, they're not necessarily little, $10 to $50 million that are, eating into all the bigger brands, a little bit here, a little bit there, and we have no competitive advantage when we're on on paid social. But where I can go that these other ones can't is store expansion. 92% of our stores are profitable. The ones that aren't profitable are because of COVID and the change in landscape in some of these major cities. So we know when we open a store that it's going to be profitable and that we will get X amount of EBITDA and X amount of revenue. And we also know that we can open up in any state in the country because we are a very democratic brand with a demo of 25 to 70 evenly distributed. So that's my competitive advantage. So now I like stores even more. And I think we're going to start to go back into this world of stores because brands are going to realize that it's too costly to fight online. Now, of course, you got to do that. That's part of your business model. But you can go to stores and, right place, right time. Someone comes by, they come in. It's kind of like a billboard. So I'm a huge store proponent. We're huge store proponents. We're going to open up another, 75 of them. I'm excited. But to me, it's that perfect blend. You got to be everywhere, really. Mm-hmm. One thing sorry to drag on here, but one thing we've never done, which is completely different than any of the competitors out there, is no wholesale. All these brands that you hear about now that are doing well, they're 30% wholesale. We have 0. So that's another focus. We have a massive upside ahead for wholesale that we haven't even touched.
So maybe we could. You did a good job of answering some questions that I was going to ask you about this kind of whole narrative or the evolution or roller coaster, I guess you could say, of the digitally native vertical brand space, where we don't need stores, then we need stores, then maybe we need wholesale, et cetera. But I guess as you start to think about growth in a channel like wholesale, how do you weigh that trade-off, particularly since, as I understand it, and my direct experience is, your stores are showrooms, and is there some pressure on the part of a wholesale partner to have merchandise that you could take with you, the customer could take with you?
We're not showrooms. Bonobos is showrooms. We sell all our product right there for customers to take with them.
Is that a shift? Because I've only bought online from you. So, but one of the first stores I was in, I think in Austin, you had very little that you could take with, I thought.
That's funny you say that. You must have been the first few weeks and Austin was one of our first stores. So that could very well have been. We tried to go with that model, but we knew immediately it wasn't going to work because people wanted excitement to leave. So now we have, something called Endless Aisle, where you can order online in store, and it's about 20% of the business. But most customers want to leave with the product.
Gotcha.
You lose out on a lot of customers if you don't have the ability to. But you're right. Now that I think about it, I think we had 10 shirts that you could take with you, and the rest you ordered online. But that backfired.
Interesting. So just kind of moving on to, I guess, as you start to think about wholesale, I mean, obviously that extends your reach quite a bit, and would seem like it has a lot of upside. So as you start to think about what sounds like a more aggressive store expansion program and exploring actual wholesale partnerships, in-store partnerships, I assume you mean by that not just an online partnership. How do you think about the trade-offs, or do you just see both of these as really good growth opportunities?
So the first thing is we waited a long time for wholesale because there wasn't a need. We were acquiring customers so fast. We were growing our stores. We didn't have stores, so we wanted to focus on store growth first. We were owning the data. The margins were great, obviously. Now it's just the next phase. If you want to become, the next billion-dollar brand, there's very few without wholesale. So it's kind of that next phase, and it's a great way to acquire customers, right? It's essentially free marketing, and you can bring more customers into the brand so that you're hitting them in stores, you're hitting them in wholesale, you're hitting them online, which is now the toughest. As far as kind of the balance, like I said, our stores are profitable. So if I lose some customers in wholesale, they'll come back into store, they'll go online. We never get some brands and especially investors, they get so hung up on, store versus online. And we used to always say, we look at it omni. We don't care. Go buy where you want to buy. We just want to be there when you're there. And if you have someone in a department store that we're not in, that woman buying for her husband, who's very, only shops, let's say at Nordstrom's or whatever the place may be, even only shops in her local store in town, these big independent wholesalers. If we can market like crazy, but if we're not there, I remember my mom only bought my dad's stuff at one shop in a town nearby, then we're losing to another brand who is there. So that's really the mindset there, that to just be everywhere for those who know and love the brand, that when they're ready to buy, that we're there.
So maybe I could just ask you, maybe we'll cut this out if you don't want to answer it, but a lot of I'll say broadly, the same kind of companies that started around the same times that yours did, like Warby, like Casper you mentioned earlier, a lot of those have talked about getting to 800-900 stores, and seemingly not being, well, at least Warby Parker's case, not so interested in wholesale, which is kind of a more complicated model, I suppose. But is there something about where you, as you're starting to maybe see diminishing returns further down the road from stores, or just the economics of that being tougher to hit, that pushes you towards wholesale? Is there something that says about how high is up for some of these brands in terms of total owned store count, or is that more just particular to your style of business? If that long question makes any sense.
I think you got to be careful there. We've seen a lot of stories of over opening stores and that not working out. The one thing about us is we strategically, our stores are 12 to 1,500 square feet. They're very, I want to say basic in that, it's meant for a productive, process when you come in. And that's why guys love it. We don't go over the top with, oak ceilings or spending $1 million on the build out. I think so many companies have made mistakes with that. Guys come in, they just want to get in and out, right? They want to have a good, smooth experience. And that's what we focus on. We have scotch there. If they want to have a glass of scotch, they try on their shirt, find their fit, walk around with an iPad and pick their shirts. The reason I say that is because of our size. Like, I do feel like we can open up more because we're never really going to get in a bad position if something goes wrong with one of them. I don't want to open up more than, and I don't want to say never, but 150 to 175. I don't think we'll ever be in the north of 200 range. I think it can get a little bit dangerous at that point. But I could change my mind.
Well, I mean,
and just on that quickly, Andy Dunn, who I've known for a long time, once told me that I asked him when they were going to open stores, and he said, "We're never opening stores." So never is a long time. I remind people.
I remember him saying that, and then when I got into the business, I thought we're not going to open stores, and then I was like, "How did the amount of people who are demanding we open stores is incredible from a customer?"
Sometimes it pays to listen to customers. It turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every now and then. All right, last question for me, and then I'll pass the mic back to Steve to bring us home. So let's pivot for a minute to your leadership style. How are you leading the organization through this tremendous change and the times we're in? And running stores is a different gig than running online. And as you said, you learned a lot about how to make great product. So talk about those kind of big fence posts or those big elements of your leadership style and how the team. And how you share that excitement and energy with the team.
Well, I wish that was a simple answer. And if you asked me in 2019, it would be a very different answer than it is today. But this has been a battle of 4 years, because it's not the 2 COVID years, which were I don't even know what to say about those. You know, we were about to sell the business in February 2020 for a lot of money to almost go into bankruptcy in April of 2020 because everyone was buying athleisure and we had 90 stores. So then to come out of it and have an incredible 2022 just to be plagued with, you know, what every retailer is plagued with, which is very high interest rates, massive inflation, customers searching for sales more than they ever have been because of how much it costs them to go. You know, I bought a coffee the other day for $10.50 at Newark Airport. It was a grande. So it's tough to expect them to want to spend a full price on a product. And then all these other retailers who never had sales are having sales every day, which only hurts us because then we have to. So right now, leading, I mean, it's a crazy environment. Now we're still performing because we have a product that you need, and I say that in that people who wear UNTUCKit shirts wear it from the second they get up, you know, to work, then after work, to dinner, then to their vacation, you know, wherever they're going, they wear it. So it's not like the old days of buying a casual shirt that you only wore on the weekends or buying a dress shirt that you only wore to work. So we're doing great, but it is not without challenge and constant changes of decisions and, you know, just trying to stay out of sale, but realizing you have to do some sales in order to compete. Obviously raising money, all that process of managing a debt business, the debt side of the business with these insane interest rates. So I feel like since 2019, it's just been, you know, very different. And we'll see when this changes. I think it's going to be when the interest rates start to get lowered and the economy starts to go back to normal. But really, it's just a little bit different. And now it's a whole different world out there with working from home. You know, that's another thing you battle with. Even though you're 2 years out, you know, in fashion, it really hasn't changed. It's usually 3 days a week in. So it's needless to say,
productivity on your downtown store locations, I'm sure as well, right? I mean, that shifts, the demand shifts geographically, but you've got a double 100%. Hit there, right?
All the major cities, you know, now to me, it's the malls out in the suburbs that do so well, not the major cities like it used to be.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. So you just try to kind of get through it.
Well, it seems like you figured out a number of ways to navigate the pretty choppy waters. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you're particularly excited about for the next few years?
I'm very excited about everything. You know, the store openings, returning to that, which we had taken a long break because of the environment. Some of this international expansion, wholesale excites me because it's just something we have zero in right now, and we could have, you know, 100 million. We did a partnership with DXL, which is a big and tall company, and they had amazing sell-throughs. So we're ramping up that partnership. We're looking at some other licensing agreements. Most brands want to work with us now. Took a while for that to happen, and because they realize the loyalty we have. So it's just I think once we get through this inflationary period, you know, hopefully the next few years are going to be great for the economy in general. And retail in general, and I think we're in a great position right now.
Well, it's a great story. Congratulations on the success you've had so far. Sounds like there's plenty of things for our listeners to be watching out for in the months and years ahead. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast, and we look forward to seeing what's next.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, I had a good friend, shout out to my friend Dean, who was already a big fan of the brand very early on UNTUCKit. He introduced me to the store in Soho, and I thought right away, brilliant idea, but how big could it be? And you'll hear from Chris's story and evolution of the brand. It's really quite successful.
Yeah, you know, we talked about this a little bit in the interview, that at one level, it seems like such a silly, simple idea. And right. How could you build a significant brand out of this? But I think it's actually a great example of how you can connect with customers, you know, when you really narrow your aim, but go deep on something that works really well, not for everybody, but for a very special defined set of someone's, and really meet their needs in a powerful way and not dilute at least too much. Obviously they're getting into some other areas, but kind of keep that focus. It can be really powerful. And as much as people have kind of tried to knock them off, really no one's been successful because they kind of own this position, not only by the way they've managed and executed it, but it's right there in the name, right? So it's really brilliant branding, as well as they've done a really nice job with the growth and expansion, and now going to a whole new level. So I'm very excited to see what's next for the brand.
Yeah, fantastic. Now I have a quick question. You grew up pretty much in the same place that Chris did. How come you don't sound like Chris? How did you not get that accent? You don't have a Texas accent either.
Well, I think it's a function of a couple things. One is working to lose it, but also 6 years in Boston, 20 years in Chicago, and now almost 20 years in Texas. So I think it's smoothed off the rough edges. But
you don't pick up accents. That's my takeaway from that. All those places have very distinct accents. You all know that, but man.
First of all, trust me, when I get together with my relatives in New York and Boston, we hear a lot of
comes back.
Hey, what? I'm walking here, or Mom, there's no hot water in the shower. So
there you go.
It can come back.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8, presented by Salonis, will air every Tuesday. Be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us. And if you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, and my brand new book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which is available in hardcover, ebook, and Audible formats just about anywhere you prefer to buy your books. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.